In today's episode of Killing Whiskey History, there are going to be two parts. The first part is all about finding out the bottling date on a bottle of dusty Canadian whiskey. I have seen whiskey fans, whiskey retailers, and whiskey auctioneers provide incorrect information about bottling dates on old bottles of Canadian whiskey. And then part two is going to be about Canadian Club 12-Year-Old Classic. I'll be talking about the brand, and I'll also be comparing Canadian Club 12-Year-Old from 1985 and 2016. Canadian liquor manufacturers used Revenue Department approved bottle and bond liquor strips from 1883 to 1996. When you see a year listed on a Canadian liquor strip, it does not mean that is the date that the whiskey was bottled. That is the date the whiskey was distilled. This liquor strip you see here on my mini bottle of Canadian Club 12-Year-Old Classic is from a series of liquor strips that were utilized for bottlings between 1972 and 1988. The 1973 refers to the distillation date of the youngest whiskey in this particular batch. And next to that is the signature of J.P. Connell, the Deputy Minister of National Revenue, who approved this series of liquor stamps for usage. Let's take a look at a couple other factors on the mini bottle. Canadian Club Classic was introduced in 1984. Hiram Walker and Sons are listed as the whiskey producer. They indeed made Canadian Club until 1987. Below that, you'll see the notation of 80 proof. Use of proof ended on American liquor bottles in 1989. Next to that, you'll see 50 milliliters, and milliliters became the unit of measurement starting in 1980. The earliest this bottle could be from is 1985, and the latest, 1987. Because it says 1973 as the distillation date, and it's aged 12 years, I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's from 1985. Now on to the current bottling of Canadian Club 12-Year-Old. You'll see that it has a batch number. The batch number does not reference the year. The batch numbers are all over the place for a Canadian Club 12-Year-Old. But beneath the batch number is the bottling code. L6 stands for 2016, and usually the three digits after that refer to the day of the year, or the 182nd day of 2016 was when this whiskey was bottled. Hiram Walker discovered that land, labor, and materials were cheaper in Canada than they were in America, so he moved his whiskey production from Detroit across the river to Windsor, Ontario in 1858. Still, his whiskey was very popular in America, especially in gentlemen's clubs, where it got the name club whiskey. In the 1880s, the American whiskey producing lobby successfully created a new law on the books that forced the country of origin to be stated on a bottle of liquor's label. Thus, by 1890, club whiskey became Canadian Club whiskey. Hiram Walker passed away in 1899, and the company remained in his family until 1926, where it merged with Gooderham and Worts, becoming Hiram Walker Gooderham and Worts Limited. Now, it remained with that company with the long name until 1987, when it was picked up by Allied Domecq. Allied Domecq had it until 2005, where it was spun off into Fortune Brands. Remained with Fortune Brands until 2011, when it became part of Beam Incorporated, now known as Beam Suntory. The distillery belongs to Pernod Ricard, but the whiskey brand belongs to Beam Incorporated or Beam Suntory, where it is its fourth best-selling whiskey brand. Canadian Club Classic 12-Year-Old Blended Whiskey from 1985. Canadian Club Classic 12-Year-Old Blended Whiskey, bottled in 2016. First, I'm going to nose the 1985 It has notes that'll be familiar to anyone who's had a lot of Canadian Club or several other Canadian blended whiskeys, and that's a lot of vanilla wafers, like vanilla cookies, caramel. The good news is the caramel isn't flat. It's actually pretty rich, like caramel candy or caramel syrup. Even though the malted barley content is supposed to be higher in Canadian Club 12-year-old, I notice a lot of corn. With time, it gets a little bit of rye, like a bit of minty, peppery rye, just a little hint of it. It does have some notes of orange gumdrops and roses. The nose, I have to say the nose is really grown on me. I really like the nose a lot. This is the Canadian Club Classic 12-year-old from 2016. Immediately, one notices that this is more closed than this. It's hard to get a good read on this so far. There's a little bit of the orange candy. There's a very noticeable baking spice note. It has a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of caramel, vodka notes, fennel seed, mint leaves, peppery basil leaves, a little bit of maple syrup. Time for a sip. It's surprisingly brisk compared to the nose. The sweetness just covers the tongue and really lingers in the palate for a long time. There are actually quite some spirity notes in here. It reads younger on the palate than it does on the nose, but a little bit of like a whole wheat bread with honey. The heat and the spirit notes have dissipated. I'm starting to get a raisin note and an apricot jam note off of this. That's a really nice surprise. This is really growing on me. 2016 version. Quite sharp, bitter, and not like an herbal bitterness, but like a very bitter oakiness. Vanilla and caramel. Flatter caramel than is in the 1985 version. It doesn't taste that dissimilar to younger versions of Canadian Club. Some ginger, a little bit of the vanilla wafer note. The sweetness starts off mild, but really builds up till it fills up the entire finish. The 1985 bottling is more complex. The palate has been well engineered to be pleasant and sippable, neat. It's pretty delicate compared to the newer version. The current version, the 2016 bottling of Canadian Club Classic 12-year-old, doesn't have much of a nose. It does open up after 20-something minutes. And the palate is not great. The 1985 bottling seems to be designed to sip neatly. The 2016 bottling seems to be designed for cocktails and mixed drinks.
Papa.
Sounds like my time.